So, one of our first big stories is that the United States Senate has moved forward to pass the Respect for Marriage Act. And this is something that we've been concerned about for some time. The Respect for Marriage Act would solidify some of the marriage rights for same sex couples. It would also provide for some protection if the Supreme Court goes ahead and decides to overturn some of those previous laws that had been challenged. We are hoping that as we continue to see this legislation move forward, that it was going to, that it would create a safe space for those marriages that are recognized, whether they are same sex or opposite sex, or in some combination of gender or sex identification. We're hoping that it provides that protection and keeps the Supreme Court from impacting marriage on a nationwide scale. Now, the interesting thing about some of the changes that have been made, because there have been changes made, the language has been adapted to try to garner some of the religious opposition that has been present trying to stop this bill moving forward. And what the language does is that it allows religious liberties to continue in effect so that people who are religious individuals and who do not want to recognize that, they don't have to. Now, this is where it's going to get into some real interesting teeter-tottering, because the Defense of Marriage Act would be repealed. And what would come out of that would be states would recognize whether or not a marriage could be done. But a state must recognize if a marriage was done outside of that state by a state that does recognize those marriages. So it's really kind of crazy. It's really detailed, but the bill will not require a state to issue a marriage license contrary to state law. One of the interesting side effects of this is that after those changes were made, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints signed on supporting the Respect for Marriage Act. And this is big because the Latter-day Saints have pushed themselves as a family church, as being family-oriented and traditionally oriented. And so for them to step forward and say, we're going to support this, that's a very big step in religious grounds. Now, due to the nature of the Latter-day Saints versus Protestant and Catholic Christians, there's still not going to be a lot of agreement between those religious arms. At the same time, it does allow for some religious undergirding and religious respect for that bill to move forward. Now, I think it's important to always note who has been, who's been going against this. And of course, we have 37 Republican senators who voted against this. And yes, all of our favorites are in there. Marsha Blackburn, John Boozman from Arkansas, John Cornyn in Texas, Tom Cotton in Arkansas, Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, Chuck Grassley, Bill Haggerty, Josh Hawley, Jim Inhofe in Oklahoma, John Kennedy down in Louisiana, James Langford in Oklahoma, Roger Marshall from Kansas, Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, Rick Scott, Tim Scott, Patrick Toomey, a lot of the normal names that we see that would typically come out against any type of respect toward inclusion and protection of rights for LGBTQ plus individuals.